I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Spotlight Network, we're exploring Glory Through Time, Volume 2 by Douglas McMurry. It is a powerful account of the past 500 years of spiritual awakenings and God's transformative presence throughout history. This volume highlights the remarkable stories and revivals that have reshaped faith and ignited change, pointing toward a modern-day Great Awakening. With his profound insights and 40 years of prayer and ministry, the author offers an inspiring journey through the legacy of God's power. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. Doug, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
It's my pleasure, believe me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. This is a monumental task to take a look at 500 years and document spiritual awakenings throughout history. Tell us where you begin on a mission such as this.
Yes, it's quite a story. It's been a great adventure, Logan. It started with a guy named Dick Simmons, who had been to the Library of Congress, done all this research about the great awakenings of the past. And back in 1983, we were aware that there was periods like that in the past, but we totally unfamiliar with what God might have done. And so his week of conference dealing with this really opened my wife and my eyes. And he ended that conference by saying, I challenge you to try doing 2 hours of prayer every day, praying for the next great awakening. And so my wife and I thought, can we do this? We accepted the challenge and we went home, and the very next day, the idea was between 5 and 7. Before anything else happens, you're going to take this time for prayer. And 5 o'clock, we were wide awake. That was a miracle in itself. But then the next day, the oven timer went off in the kitchen at exactly 5 o'clock. And we realized it wasn't just Dick Simmons who was calling us to prayer. It was God. So then we began to experience the power of God. I don't know if we have time to tell a little story.
Sure.
It was some years later, 1985, we moved to Richmond, Virginia. And the papers were full of headlines that Richmond had the second highest murder rate in the country. And so I and a few others who were learning prayer got together and began to pray over the city. And we developed citywide prayer. So blacks and whites, people of different denominations coming together because of concern for the violence in the city. And finally, on February 9th, one of our team, Wellington Boone, called for a citywide prayer gathering. And at one of the churches, and 600-700 people came to that from all over the city, blacks and whites coming together to pray over the murder rate. And on that Sunday night, I'll never forget it, we bound the spirit of murder over Richmond. And then after the conference was done, we all went home. And a month later, this article came out in the paper. It explains how from February 9th, which is the day that we bound the spirit of murder over the city, to March 10, 1 month exactly, not a single murder in the city of Richmond. And the police were baffled.
Yeah.
Well, see, God was showing me his power. I needed to have an experience of the power of God before I could write on the power of God. You see what I'm saying? So it wouldn't be just an academic kind of study. Yeah. Now, it's involved a lot of book learning and I would say spirit-led research into areas of of divine outpourings that I never myself knew about. You know, God was leading me to discover things about his power that I didn't know about and had been totally forgotten. Almost all of these stories have been forgotten by most Christians. And so he asked me to go to the Library of Congress, and then I started this adventure of research. And it's been quite an adventure over 35 years of, of just God showing me what he had done and then asking me to write about it. And
Amazing.
yeah, that's how this came into being.
How do you define Great Awakening, and what are some examples in our world history of Great Awakenings that are covered in your book?
All right. Let me just tell one story.
Sure.
And with this one story, there are 60 others. You see what I'm saying? So
Yep.
if I can tell you the one story, um, all right, back in 1620, that's when the Pilgrims came, you know, to Plymouth. Well, before that, there was a virgin soil epidemic, is what they call it. There's just whole villages wiped out by smallpox, and it was just a terrible time for the native tribes in New England. During that time, one of the leaders of the tribes received a vision, and the vision was of people with strange clothing coming, and one person among them wearing a black robe, and they would learn about God from the person in the black robe. And the result of that would be God would bless them with victuals and good things. That's the way the story went. Well, uh, in the uh, 1630s and 40s, that's when the Puritans came. Okay, King Charles I and King Charles II persecuted the Puritans. They developed a community called Boston, which was actually New Boston. You know, it was named after the old Boston, and then they developed that area. Well, they were people wearing strange clothes, but one of them was wearing a black robe, a clergyman, and his name was John Eliot. And John Eliot felt that God was calling him to bring the gospel to native people, and so he learned Algonquin. And then he, I'm sure, in broken Algonquin, preached his first sermon to a community of Algonquin people nearby. And as he preached on the valley of dry bones, you know, blow on the valley of dry bones, and the bones will come to life. That was the gist of the sermon. Well, as he preached that sermon, lo and behold, one of the men in the audience began to weep, you know, and it was obvious something was happening with him. And as it turns out, he felt that Jesus was coming to him and saying he was going to be the guy that blows on the dry bones and they're going to all come to life. Well, John Eliot and the Puritans did not have what I would call a high view of the Holy Spirit. They didn't really believe in visions, for example, that the Holy Spirit would give vision, even though it was clear that the Holy Spirit had given this vision, and it was clear, it looked like it referred to John Eliot, but he didn't believe in that. You see what I'm saying? But the people who had the vision, they're the ones that believed in it. And the same with this experience that this native guy, whose name was Waban. Waban means wind in Algonquin. And Waban felt like he was the guy that was going to blow on these people and they were going to come alive in the Holy Spirit. And so even though he didn't know what it meant, he realized he's the guy. And a few weeks later, his whole wigwam, okay, they lived together in one room. His whole wigwam was filled with the presence of the Lord. And everybody was weeping in that. And it's like his whole family was the first ones this is the first experience of spiritual awakening on the American continent, and it was natives, it was not whites. So Waban he sees that this is spreading, and he says, "I think I should start a praying town." So he did. He started a praying town, a separate place for people who are experiencing the presence of Jesus. And they're going to learn how to pray. They're going to learn how to relate to this great being who's revealing himself to them. The first praying town was called Nonantum, which means rejoicing. Then that filled up, and God was doing work in other villages and other tribes, so other praying towns growing up all over New England until there are 12 of them, and there are 3,600 native people who are experiencing this awakening, and they want to learn how to pray to Jesus and relate to him and walk with him. And that really is our first experience of a spiritual awakening in America.
It's an
Isn't it?
amazing story, and I never heard it before.
Yeah, I
And I've
know.
been a practicing Christian my whole life, so
Right.
it's wonderful that you revealed such stories like this that are,
There are so many.
yeah, and they've got
There are so many.
so much great impact, so many that you actually have two volumes. Um,
Yes, yes.
Tell us, volume one, volume two,
Okay, all
what
right.
they,
Well, if you had told me at the beginning that I would be writing the whole history of the power of God from the day of Pentecost 2,000 years ago, moving right around the world in an orderly way until today with the Back to Jerusalem movement, I would have said, I can't do that. But the way it worked is almost like breadcrumbs. God would give me a little bit and say, look at this.
yeah.
And then I would develop some talks. I had Glory Through Time talks. I'd go around giving these talks of what I was discovering. And then he'd give me a little more, and he'd lead me to a person. Sometimes it would be a person like Tom Lenny, who's the main revival historian in Scotland, or Ben Torrey in Korea, who's the great grandson of R.A. Torrey, who was one of the great revivalists of the past. Just showing me through, not just through books, but through people, um, so many parts of the story that I was unaware of, and then adding that in. So pretty soon, I'm telling the story of Egypt, and then France, and then Ireland, and then Scotland, and then Great Britain, England, until basically paganism was confronted by the power of God. It's King Jesus. It's the King of nations reaching out to the nations one by one and revealing himself by the power of the Holy Spirit. And that is an exciting story.
Absolutely. And so many of those stories are captured on the pages of your books. The folks at home can learn more on your website, dougmcmurray.com.
That's correct. That's exactly. It's not quite ready yet at the time of
Okay.
this interview, but it will be in a week or two.
And that's where they'll be able to find out about your ministry. They'll be able to find out about your books. They'll be able to read more about volume one, volume two, and see what they include and what they cover, and
Yeah.
probably links there where they can order the books as well.
Yes, exactly.
Till that happens, we will have links below our interview, so you can order these books. Wonderful. There's two volumes so far. Are you planning a third volume?
Well, there is a third volume already, and
Okay.
it's really the first one. Um, the Forgotten Awakening was where God had me start. And this is tribes in the Pacific Northwest who had visions, just like I described. Every tribe in the Columbia, the headwaters of the Columbia Plateau is what they call it. Um, every tribe had a vision like that, and everyone was different. And then in this book, I show what happened as a result of that.
Wonderful. Well, we're looking
Quite an
forward to
exciting
reading.
story.
Yeah, you could teach a course on all of these books. They're really very comprehensive
Yeah.
and encyclopedic in their scope, but very, very readable, no doubt, and very enjoyable. And it will perhaps spark a spiritual awakening in you. The book we've been primarily focused on today is Glory Through Time, Volume 2 by Douglas McMurray. It is a powerful account of the past 500 years of spiritual awakenings and God's transformative presence throughout history. These are remarkable books, 3 volumes so far. I got a feeling there'll be a 4th volume eventually, and you will just cherish these books. You'll want them for the Christmas season and, of course, beyond as well. Doug, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
It's been delightful to meet you.
Been a delight to meet you as well and to learn from you and hear your stories. You're not only a natural and gifted writer, you're a natural born storyteller. So I've enjoyed talking to you very much. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time until next time on Spotlight.